I'm your host, Brandy Fleck, and this is Human Amplified. This is a show about our existence, our place in the world, what it all means, and ways to make it better. From big picture ideas that blow your mind to practical life advice, we explore it all. We amplify the voices of healers, survivors, mystics, disruptors, scientists, creatives, and everyday people like you and me to expand our consciousness and use that awareness to evolve into who we really want to be in the depths of our soul. Humans Amplified. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoy this episode, please go rate and review the show. And remember to subscribe where you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Support for this podcast comes from Bed of Nails. You've probably seen acupressure products before, maybe in your Facebook feed or something like that. It could be for any number of brands, but it's a fact that the Bed of Nails is the Swedish original. I've been using the Bed of Nails mat and pillow since 2012, before they were popular. No joke. I personally remember when no other products were widely available and when I was scared to even try it. But I did try it. When you lay on it at first, it can get a little uncomfortable, but that's short-lived. After a few minutes, your back gets warm, starts pulsing, and then starts to relax. You quickly get used to distributing your weight on the Bed of Nails, and it's nothing but a welcome reprieve from a stressful day. Over the years, it's helped me increase circulation, relax, and reduce pain in my back and neck, something you can probably relate to needing help with, yeah? I also use my Bed of Nails every single time I meditate. I love it. Go to humanamplified.com/episodes/109 for your special Bed of Nails offer for Human Amplified listeners. There's a 15% discount there waiting for you and an affiliate link that will take you to the Bed of Nail products to get yours today. This episode is all about using spirituality as a practical tool in your life, thanks to today's guest, Ashley B. Jones. Ashley is a transformation coach and healer based in Denver, Colorado, who supports feelers and dreamers as they learn to embrace change and build inner security to transform their lives into one where anything is possible. She's known for her unique, holistic approach that merges modern understandings of the mind and energy with ancient practices that remind us of the power of our own inner knowing. Not only is Ashley an intuitive healer, but she also has a degree in behavioral neuroscience. We start out discussing how important intuition and discernment are, and you'll find this is a theme throughout, combined with things like self-worth and nurturing the relationship with all of yourselves. And you heard that right. There's more than one self. This episode is absolutely packed with good information, and the information is dense. We throw a lot at you in a short amount of time, so you may want to listen to this episode more than once. I'm still processing things we talked about. We discuss topics throughout like making sense of where science and spirituality meet, what intuition is, what neuroscience is, how they work together, how to trust your intuition, from using your imagination to knowing when distortions are creeping in. We then dig into how to use your intuition when you rely heavily on logic and how to address your own skepticism. Ashley also details her personal healing journey, gives us a rundown on the 6 clairs of psychic ability, what spirituality does to our brain, what's in the unconscious, and the ethics to consider when relying on your intuition. And as if that would not have been the most awesome episode in and of itself, then we end with Ashley doing a collective tarot reading. And to be honest with you, after the reading, she really dug in with me on how it applied to my own life. I loved doing that. At the time of the interview, not all of the reading sunk in or resonated, while some of it did. But as I listened back to it while producing this episode, it hit me like a ton of feathers. And I had even more insight into my fears around my creative projects now than I did then. I love it, and it's so helpful. So, When you get to that part, as Ashley says, take what resonates and leave what doesn't. And whenever you listen to this episode, whether it's your first or third time, is when you're meant to hear it. Trust the process, trust your intuition. And in the time since I interviewed Ashley and now, she's put together a free workshop all about trusting yourself and listening to your intuition. So I've linked that in the show notes. Be sure to check it out. And here we go. For the links mentioned throughout this episode, visit the show notes at humanamplified.com/episodes/109. Ashley, I ask everybody who comes on the show, what does being human mean to you? So I would love to hear your thoughts.
It's just so interesting that you asked this because I've been thinking about this a lot lately. Being human to me means accepting the imperfection of our lived experience and finding the perfection and freedom within it. So being able to really give the self, who you are, wherever you are, the permission to experience all that you want to experience in life, and then giving yourself permission to do it super imperfectly and finding the way that feels right to you, which is when I say perfect, like the one that feels authentic and right and aligned. And we'll get, more into that later, but finding that place of alignment and then just like having fun with it.
I
Type two
love that.
fun and type one fun, both types of fun.
Are you referring to like personality types?
So type two fun is fun that is like fun in the moment and fun afterwards. And type two fun is not fun in the moment, but is fun afterwards upon reflection. So I often think that I live in Colorado, that type two fun is like hiking a mountain, or like you get stuck in a rainstorm and you're miserable and you're like worried you're not going to get out. But in reflection, you're like, wow, like that was a great time. Would do that again. Versus like type one fun is like, I don't know, getting some ice cream or like seeing a movie you really like, versus like the other type of fun that is like in the moment you're like, I don't like this at all. But on reflection, you're like, that was kind of a cool experience. Might do it again.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Because yeah, that happens all the time, like type 2 fun. So,
Yeah.
Ashley, I'd love to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I was just saying, it's been so long since you and I met in our trauma informed training program, 2 years ago. So I'm just grateful to be able to have people like you who I get to connect with and, share some of my story and get to connect with you and hear more of your story.
We were just talking about how fast time has been passing, and I don't know if any of the listeners have experienced that, but it does seem like time is just changing.
Hmm.
So before we dive in, can you please tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so I am a transformation coach and healer, and I help people navigate big life transitions, or cultivate transitions in their life in a way that is empowering and freeing and feels right to them. And in doing that, you can basically harness the ability to transform your life, your experience within it, and yourself to be one that feels more like what you want it to. So harnessing those life transitions to be moments of transformation.
I love that. Yeah, of course, that's my jam too. Like, I love it because we're so there in the coaching world. And
Mhm.
one of the things that really stood out to me about you when we were in that training together was your use of intuition
Mm,
and how it just informs, I feel like, your entire practice. Would that be
yes.
an accurate statement?
100%. And, I infuse within like the umbrella of being a transformation coach and healer, um, Reiki, which is an energy healing modality that comes from Japan, intuitive work, like you mentioned, which to me is like all of it. So, body being Reiki, somatic work, I infuse mindset work, and then beautifully like readings, spirituality. So, it's really this mind, body, spirit experience where you're able to like look at where you're at in your mind, really drop in deeper, and then really experience this sensation of being held by something greater and this faith in something that goes beyond the literal and the physical with the spirituality. And so we merge that together with like these really cool guided meditations and these different experiences where you get to witness for yourself something greater, or tapping in through readings like this knowing that goes beyond the literal or the material, that world that we live in.
Ooh. And guys, if you're watching the video, or if you're not watching the video, Ashley just held up her deck of tarot cards, which you're in for a treat because I think she's going to do a little reading at the end of this episode.
Yeah.
Awesome. So hang in there. Real quick though, you also have a degree in behavioral neuroscience. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I
Oh,
do. Yeah, that's actually what kind of during while I was in school, that was really a catalyst for me. And we can dive into more of this later, but the feeling of like I was steeped in like the hard science of how the brain works and why we are the way we are, and how does the body work, and how does our brain inform our behaviors and our interactions, some of these like bigger life experiences, why we are the way we are and the way we behave. At the same time, had gotten a reading for the first time and was like diving into doing readings for myself and my friends, and had this like weird mind bendy experience where my logical scientific brain was like, this shouldn't be working. And yet I seem to be able to do it every single time, to the point in which I would say something and then I'd flip over a card that would say the exact thing that I just said to my friend. And so the statistical significance, I was like, you can't make it up. Like this is just repeating, repeating, repeating. There must be something here. And so that was really a big catalyst for me to go into where I am now, of trying to understand how do you take spirituality and make it really practical and implementable for people in their lives, to be a tool that they can use, which is to me what intuition is like one of the greatest tools that we have, as humans have.
Okay. So science and spirituality sort of meet in your life. And
Yes.
have you been able to make sense of it?
I'm in the process of it. I think that it's interesting for me because to me, modern science is like the modern understanding of all these things, and that it's just a different lens. And then you have all these like ancient spiritual practices that are like thousands, if not tens of thousands of years old, if not, like I would actually go to argue, and I don't have the proof yet, but hypothesis that intuition and this type of spiritual work is almost was happening at the very same time humans were developing. It like it goes hand in hand. So this has always been something we've been doing, and we've used different lenses throughout history, whether it's philosophy, whether it's spirituality, whether it's religion, whether it's science, chemistry, alchemy, whatever it looks like, to try and understand how it is that we can find freedom within our lives. And so for me, it's looking at like spirituality, which I look as like ancient practices, and
Mhm.
then modern science, which is like a modern understanding of the practice, and like looking at the way they like match up and merge.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I think we're going to get into that a little bit.
Yes.
To lay the foundation, how do you define intuition? And then also, can you tell us what is neuroscience?
Yes. So to me, intuition is the language of the soul, and it's interpreted by the self. So when I say this word self, what I mean is self is the connection between the soul and the body. It's where we and our identity and our ego sit, typically within like more holistic or more metaphysical practices. That's going to be considered the heart center in our heart, which is why typically that's where we feel so deeply. It sits right in the intersection between heaven and earth. And our soul is like the energy body. It is the thing that gives us life, that is this spiritual essence that's immaterial. And the body is like the physical container in which the soul sits. So the self is like sitting kind of like it's the in between, running interference of listening to the soul, listening to the body, and then interpreting it. Neuroscience is the scientific study of the nervous system. So that is the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spine, and the peripheral nervous system, which is like the extrasensory perception that we have. So if you're touching your hands, when you move your legs, that's your brain telling your peripheral, your body's nervous system to do something. So that's kind of where neuroscience really intersects, and it's the literal scientific study of the cells, of the electrical impulses in the body, of the different hormones, of the different neurotransmitters, like dopamine or serotonin are ones people are super familiar with, oxytocin, epinephrine, norepinephrine, like all these different types of experiences, and the way our body is able to communicate with itself. So literally, it's the science of the nervous system.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's about the container.
Yes.
Okay. And I loved your definition of like the self and the soul and that explanation. I've never heard it like that. It's going to take me a minute to process it. I'm going to be thinking about that. Can you explain for us where neuroscience and intuition intersect, or do they?
They do. And I think it's interesting because, I think everyone who's listening to this, every single human is intuitive. So I just want to start there. I think sometimes it can be like, well, I'm not intuitive. I'm not picking up on this. I'm not reading cards and picking up information like extra peripherally, or I'm not, I don't have a sixth sense, when in reality, it is actually built into every single human. And within neuroscience, a lot of how they rationalize it is that intuition is, or how they explain it is that intuition is the way in which our unconscious is picking up on sensations and experiences, and the way that's mixing with our past experiences. So things that we're not consciously, like, I see a yellow background behind Brandy. Yellow is that, but you might have a certain response to the yellow based on something that's living in your past or your unconscious, or like belief systems that you have, and the way that that then perceives it. So to me, what our intuition is picking up on information in your surroundings, whether that's your inner self, like your body, or someone else who's coming into, like, someone comes to you, you're like, that person has a weird vibe. I don't know why, but I just get this weird no feeling,
Mhm.
intuitive knowing. You walk into a space, you're like, I don't know, this is weird. Hard no for me. Pivot, intuition. People have, like, I hear all the time about doctors and nurses who like just have this knowing of, I need to go to this room. And the minute they get there, their patient codes. Like, there's a lot of really interesting research that's starting to be done to understand intuition and extrasensory perception. It's still considered very taboo in the scientific community,
Mhm.
um, which is unfortunate because it is something that is so prevalent and so literal. And I think part of that is that it is both a very personal internal experience. So it's hard to account for all of the different, what they call confounding variables, or things that you can't control for. So like, you could have bias, you could have influence in the environment. So trying to study something to that extent around intuitive knowing can be really difficult. So that's part of it. And at the same time, like, this is something that really informs how humans interact with life, and also what makes us so human. Like, it is our perception, it is our feeling, it is what we know to be true, even if that knowing doesn't literally make sense. Even if you're like, logically, this should be fine, but
Mhm.
I'm picking up on something that goes beyond my logic. And that's where, like, for neuroscience, what they've said is like, you're picking up and experiencing something that is in your unconscious, or is not just being like, is not in your present awareness of like what you are seeing and witnessing, that goes beyond like the literal facts, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I've got a basic understanding of the nervous system, but
Yeah.
the word neuroception keeps coming to my mind. Like,
Mhm.
is that related in some way? Is it some kind of like your nervous system doing something?
I guess it depends on what you mean by doing something. I think it is something that and this is, I think, where there's not necessarily that understanding yet, because to me, when we talk about the soul, and you're picking up on information from the soul or someone else's energy body or your own energy body, and the different layers, you're able to actually access that information that goes beyond what we in modern science understand. We don't necessarily have the tools, the research hasn't been done. We're still working on it,
Hmm.
but it is really, to me, one of my teachers, my Reiki teacher, once called the brain middle management, and I really liked that perception. So it's kind of like your brain, or that middle ground is picking up on all this energy, your personal soul, which is like who you are at your core, all that you're capable of. It is connected into really like your unique identity in outside of the human experience, like this essence, the presence of information that you come into this life having, like when a soul merges with a little baby child. And then your nervous system is picking up on that information, like who I am, what I desire, my dreams, like what I'm here to do in the world, my purpose, like picking up on information. And we can get into this, but like of other beings, of like spirit guides or other versions of self, or your higher self or your shadow self, like, and then it is merging into the body, which stores experiences we've had. So the nervous system is then like picking up on like lived experiences. So anything you've experienced in your life, whether that's like capital T trauma or little t trauma, and like making sense then of like what feels right and safe to you, what feels good. And so really it's like your intuition is this beautiful, very, very simple, but also very complex language of negotiating, like based on like what my dreams are, like what my soul brings in. How does that merge into my physical body and what feels right? And how does that then inform the way I'm experiencing the world? And also able to, like, what I really love about intuition is because it's your language of yourself, it gives you insight into what do I want to do? What is right for me? That's maybe not, the 2.5 kids in the white picket fence. It might not be the traditional route of living life, but it's this valuable, invaluable, truly tool to be able to navigate life in a way that feels right to you. And like when I say right, I mean like that deep feeling of like, I don't know how to explain this. Like, this is my purpose. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, this just feels really good in my body. It feels grounded. It feels stable. I feel calm, but also like really excited. I feel like this is expansive to me. It's that energy of rightness. And that's where, to me, intuition is able to help us align and attuned to what is right for me. And how do I then listen to myself and follow that, even if it goes beyond other people's lived experiences or collective conscious experience, where it's like, whether that's the society you live in or the community group you live in of like what you should be doing based on like group lived experience. So to me, intuition again is like my personal language that then is the way I can listen to what feels right and good for me. And that intersects with values. And there's so much that goes into that. And that's kind of negotiated against like what someone else's belief system is going to be for me. And that's why I think it's just so important to
Yeah.
just have that relationship to it and really build that sense of self-trust of like, I know what I'm feeling and how do I follow that? What does it mean to follow through on that? What does it mean to build that for myself?
And I think it's really something that you mentioned about trauma
Hmm.
and, like our experiences are stored in our body, and our intuition is sort of like negotiating with our body. I believe that's what you
Yes.
said.
Hmm.
Okay. That makes me think that things that we've experienced in this lifetime could actually distort or hinder our intuition from coming in. And so, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think this gets talked about a lot with the difference between fear and intuition. And I read somewhere once, I'm not sure who said it, that fear shouts and intuition whispers. And a lot of times, what will happen, and this is why developing that sense of quietness of like, what does yes feel like in my body? What does no feel like in my body? How can I start to decipher that language, like very simply, and then let it develop from there? Because even as someone who does this professionally, I still have moments where I'll get activated or something from my past that I've experienced puts me into a state of fight or flight. Which you then in your brain are tapping into that more primal, that more reptilian brain that's literally like, I need to survive right now, which turns off the higher levels of cortical functioning, which is where some of that really developed intuitive knowing comes in. And it's hard in those moments to know what is right and wrong because you're in a state of like threat. And so a lot of times when we have experienced something in the past, that was traumatic, whether that was, again, big T trauma, little T trauma, single point trauma, complex trauma, where we have had an experience where we're like, I don't feel safe in that. And that has then informed into like, what do I actually want to build now? So when we talk about negotiating, what I mean is like, I want to feel freedom, right? Like, I think that's really the core of like every human's purpose on the world is like to find freedom. And then it's like, what does freedom actually mean to me? And it could be in the very, very small moments, it can be in these different layers, but finding that feeling of freedom for the self and for the community and collective as a whole. And then noticing where my body doesn't feel free, and is this something that I need to push on? Is this something that I actually don't want to push on? And it becomes, again, that questioning, that relationship of developing like, is this something that needs to be changed? Is this not something that needs to be changed? And then the intuition comes in of like, what feels right? Like, how do I want to navigate this? What is the way I feel empowered to navigate this? What way does this come in? And maybe it's illogical, but I feel like I'm really called to go to this one place to like do this healing work. And it just becomes kind of this like inner compass is what I like to call it, of like
Mhm.
being able to find north, even if your brain in these moments can be really activated or your body can hit a signal up into your brain and be like, whoa, like I don't know why that just activated like this threat response within me. How can I calm my body back down so I can kind of hear like what's going on? What do I feel like is right versus being in that full like response state that we can get into.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I think it does. And I want to ask you about your healing journey too, because I know you alluded to it a little bit with saying, you still get activated at times, even though this is your work. But what would you say to somebody who is super logical and they don't really believe that their intuition is a thing or that
Mhm.
it would guide them in the right direction?
I would ask what their relationship with their self is like. Because oftentimes I feel like logic and the beautiful way that it operates, it's so tied to the mind and our left brain of like trying to organize and create structure and create understanding, which a lot of times for me is comes from this place of wanting to control and create safety for
Ooh.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And like the logic is this. Let me follow it. Some people lean more feeling and intuitive in the way that they operate. I mean, there's so many personality tests who talk about this. And some people lean more logical. Your intuition can feel logical to you. It is, again, your unique language. And so you might not have the same type of intuitive experience as someone who sees or is like interpreting sensations or their body. Like there are six different types of intuitive sensing that we have. They're
Mm.
called the clairs. If you're the most one people everyone's going to know is called clairvoyance,
Mm-hmm.
which is considered like clear sight. Like it is knowing sight. Like I am able to see beyond my literal eyes. There is also claircognizance, which is intuitive knowing. There is clairsentience, which is intuitive feeling. So people who pick up on information and feel it in their body, oftentimes that is like very similar to empathy or like empaths. People identify as empaths. There is alience, which is clear smell. So people who like might smell something coming up. Clairgustance, which is clear taste, and then clairaudience, which is hearing. People who might like hear, and oftentimes for me, as someone who is clairaudient, like I don't literally hear someone talking to me in like a different voice or tone. That'd be kind of wild. But there are like thoughts in my brain that I know are not like my mind speaking. And so, really, I think someone that maybe leans more logical might really relate to something that is more knowing based. Or maybe they would relate more to something that is more I think knowing would be the one I would say, like, I just know this to be true. And like that doesn't, maybe it's illogical in the sense that like A plus A equals B and like you're throwing in a completely new variable. But I think it's deciding to develop like what does your relationship to intuition look like? And how can you let this be a piece of information to you
Mm.
rather than it being like another completely different thing that you have, that it is doesn't make sense, quote unquote. And I
Yes.
think it's also giving yourself permission to start to listen to when you pick up on something that maybe doesn't feel like it makes sense. Like I go into a club, why do I feel weird today? Is there something off about the club? I'm just sensing something. Starting to listen to those subtle cues and knowing and acknowledging that like you have been intuitive your entire life in the sense that you have picked up on things. And the more that you can kind of listen, the more you can really just see this as a tool to help you as another piece of information to factor into your mind for it to work with.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that'll be really helpful. And whatever you feel comfortable sharing with us would be great. But I would love to know a little bit about what healing you've personally been through.
Yeah. This is where I'm like, where to start, which I feel like a lot of people who have any type of experience with healing work is like, when I was born, I've experienced um I guess high level. So I grew up with two siblings who have severe, not severe, but a pretty intense brain malformality. That's very rare. And so I grew up in a high stress environment just by the nature of them having seizures and them having like more higher needs. And then my mom had cancer, and then my parents' marriage started to crumble. And so there was just a lot of stress that I was around.
Hmm.
And I am a very big feeler. Like I am someone who has always deeply felt my emotions, has felt very just called to the spiritual aspects of life, and has just been very creative as a kid. And so when I got to high school and was just like, teenage years, you're really going through it. And that, compounded with like a lot of my home experience and things I was going through within my own mental health journey, I was started to feel very lost. And my mom at the time took me, had gotten a concussion playing soccer, and she took me to go see an energy healer that one of her friends had related her to, or referred her to. And she is a nurse and did research at Stanford. And like, it's, she's again, very in the hard sciences, but has always kind of been curious about this other world. And I had this very profound moment where I went in and the energy healer put a piece of my skull back into place. And I remember going in feeling one way and leaving being like, oh, I can physically feel a difference in my body.
Wow.
And and then me being, the 15-year-old, 16-year-old that I am, she's like talking about spirit animals. Like, I want to know what my spirit animal is. And she's like, okay, well, before you go to bed tonight, ask that your spirit animal come to you in your dream. And I swear to God, I woke up that night and the entire animal kingdom was in my bedroom and it freaked me out. Like, I was like, and we're done. Like, that was too much. I don't know what just happened. Like that was kind of crazy. And I kind of disconnected it from for a while, but again, was like really trying to find what it meant to be belong and trying to figure out who I was, and was really struggling with depression and anxiety and neurodivergence and like all of this stuff. And then, the chaos of being human. And I went to college and was really trying to figure out like, I want to be different. I want to like be confident. I want to be popular and I want to like myself. And then just again, really went through it socially and really was still struggling with my own mental health. And at a very dark time in college, it's funny, like had just been introduced to like a reading for the first time. And I had this profound reading with this woman who I'd never met. She was on the phone. She didn't see me. And yet she knew more about me than I knew about myself. And I felt so seen and so loved and so held in a time that I felt so disconnected from myself, so unaccepted, so lost. And that was really like the beginning where something I'd always been like really curious about, but it was this very profound moment for me where I needed someone to hold a torch or to see the light in me when I felt truly like I was drowning in darkness and did not know how to get out. Um, a lot of like physical, nervous system responses, just a lot of like, depression and anxiety and just not knowing. And it became this like really slow journey, of being in therapy and working with intuitives and working with healers to like find my way back to myself. And when I say back to myself, I mean back into connection, because we're always going to feel moments where we stray or feel lost and then we come back, but really knowing that I have this level of relationship with myself that is loving and is caring and is based in this place of true faith in what I'm able to get through and what I'm able to go through. And so as I was healing through a lot of different things that had come up and happened, some that I will keep private, for the sake of, everyone's story, but I learned Reiki, and that was like also this massive, profound experience for me where I could, feel, and I felt like my senses were opened, and I was feeling I was continuously just coming more and more and more back to life, more capacity to feel my emotions, more capacity to experience my life, more of a relationship in the way that I always kind of knew I knew how to operate, versus feeling like I was too much or I was feeling too much or completely overstimulated most of the time. And I think that's where like the healing work for me has come in like very different stages of tapping into something greater and tapping into this healing experience that goes beyond maybe what science knows, and merging the two together to be these really beautiful aids of, for me, Reiki is a beautiful way to tap into the nervous system and to work with the nervous system and to work with the body, and the way that the body, keeps the score, and the way that the body holds trauma and the physical muscles that like experience it, or when you're in the moment, like your body's not processing what you're going through. So it was this invitation to start to release and let go. And it was this new tool that I had. And it's been since then like this really interesting experience for me of like meeting myself where I am, and then meeting the past versions of myself who've experienced these things that still live in my body, with new levels of compassion to be able to continue to create more freedom and more autonomy and an ability to live a life and to be in relationship and to be in community in a way that I've always wanted to be in. And I really feel I truly believe a huge part of that was me listening to myself and me trusting myself and me standing by myself, and the self-possession that comes from working really deeply on perfectionism or people pleasing and feeling like I knew who I was in the world. And so to me, healing is such an interesting word, because I think a lot of times we relate it to being healed or being perfect or not having problems,
Hmm.
or not experiencing any discomfort in our lives.
Yeah.
And the unfortunate truth that I had to realize on my own journey was that this is not a something I can check off. This is not a point that I'll ever arrive at. Like I'm never going to be a healed, quote unquote, human. No one is. Now there are people who are able to have a relationship with their self and what the body has gone through and what they have gone through that gives you permission to navigate through healing in a gentle and softer way because they have built that relationship and restored that level of trust and restored that level of connection within and feel like they have a relationship to something greater where they can have faith that things are working out for them, even if it doesn't look like it, even if they're not sure how it's going to look like it. They do have this ability to, or like at least I do, like I have this ability now to know that I can navigate through anything because of all of the tools that I have. And spirituality to me is like one of the biggest tools that we as humans have in our pocket. And I will say, if you're interested in like the neuroscience of all of it, there's this incredible book that was recently written by a woman named Dr. Lisa Miller, who did research on the effects of spirituality on the brain. And crazy enough, they realized that people who have high levels of spiritual like connection or consider themselves highly spiritual have an actual thickening of the cortex that atrophies during depression, that it
Whoa.
creates resilience to depression, which I was like I knew that because I had seen it happen in my own life. And that like the idea of feeling completely under the water, completely lost, like no energy, can't get out of bed, like cannot even function as myself. Like I still experience like moments of it, but I now am able to come back very quickly or be able to reconnect. And I have all these tools in my toolkit. So I just think that that is one of the most interesting, like new pieces of science of like spirituality actually is can create a thickening, create a resilience to a healthier brain and our ability to then experience life. And you can see it literally.
That's awesome. And like I get chills when you say that. And that resonates personally. I feel like I've experienced that too. And man, there's so much there to unpack. And I know like, where do I want to go from here? You mentioned your past self
Mhm.
sort of meeting your present self through this healing process.
Mhm.
And then recently, in one of your newsletters that I'm following, you did this meditation where you met your future self.
Yes.
I would love for you to tell us more about that.
So I and the practice that I work with 5 different versions of self pretty formally. Now, within those, like basically, I think of them, you can think of them as like groups of versions of self. There's the past self, which is literally any version of you that has come before this moment. So inner children, inner teenagers, this could be you in high school, this could be you in, however old you are, it could be you like 5 days ago, it could be you 6 months ago, it could be you at the very beginning of your life. So these are different versions that have these emotional imprints from our past that hold on to them. So typically, like one past self is going to have one type of information from your past that is informative to your present. So I really like looking at the past self because when we have limiting beliefs or we have things that we've forgotten and want to reclaim or energy that we feel like was taken from us, that's typically where it lives in like some type of past version.
Okay.
Now we have the future versions, which are everyone that can come in the future and possibilities. And I love working with the future self because not oftentimes, our brain is going to continue to operate with confirmation bias. So everything that I've previously experienced is how I'm going to experience all of life coming forward. It's you're operating with the information that you have. So your nervous system, your body, your brain, everything that you have learned up until this point, you will then continue to look for to get that confirmation based on like what has already existed in your body, brain.
And that's sort of where, like, the distortion, like, why I was thinking about that when we were talking about the distortions.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I think that's where sometimes it's like I want to believe something different, but my body has no information or proof that that's possible. So I
right.
love working with the future because that is a version of you that has what you want. She is the one, or he is the one, or they are the one that has already happened. They're living in the reality that has not yet existed. And in a mind bendy way, you in this moment are actually a past version of future you
Right.
in the present. So it becomes this really cool, like I like to think of it as takes like all of the experiences we have and puts these in these categories of ways that you can use different versions of you to find the way to go forward. What's holding me back from the past? Where do I want to go? What information and guidance does she have as someone who's already experienced this, tapping into that wisdom that lives within you in this moment, and then understanding like how past you is experiencing that. So right past you, future you. We have the inner self, which is you right here, right now, listening at this exact moment, whenever you are listening to this podcast. The inner self is literally lives like in our bodies, in our heart. And that's kind of where she is the connection point between every version of you because she is you right now in this present moment. She is you in this fixed state. And so she is then sitting in between the future, sitting in between the past, starting to listen to like, what do these mean to me? And what does that mean for my body in this moment? There is a higher version of you. So this is your soul, your highest expression or like favorite expression or like your potential. The higher self is this unembodied, because none of these are really embodied, but truly unembodied energy of like capacity and potential and lightness. And then there is the shadow self, which is something that we really don't love to work with at all, at all, at all, at all, because there is fear and shame that lives within the shadows. It is the parts of us that we don't like to admit because they're not perfect and they are not typically how we want to be perceived. Typically, it's like that shadow self develops from these parts that we shove into the unconscious because there's some part of it that's not acceptable to our present understanding of the self. So this could be, I don't know, like lust. Like if you think of the any seven deadly sins, it's like a lot of like in their shame, right? We've shoved those into the shame, like jealousy. You think about like envy. You think about like gluttony. It's anything that feels like it's sitting in the unconscious that we don't have control over because we really don't like looking at that part of who we are and looking at that part of our consciousness and our existence that isn't in that necessarily light state. And I want to be very clear that I love the shadow self. And part of the greatest piece of healing you can do is creating a relationship with your shadows where you're not afraid of them and yet you listen to them and you're like, hey, I hear what you're saying and I see you. Like, what do you need right now? Where do you need love? Where do you need acceptance and capacity to understand what you're actually trying to say to me and where you didn't have your needs met or where you didn't get what you needed in that moment? The
Yeah.
shadow work is like super fun and very much also fundamental. And that's where like the highest self can come in and be like, I have all this. How can I work with the shadows to merge? So those are the five different versions of self that kind of became this like pyramid or this compass
Okay.
center, and then higher is sits up, shadow sits lower, future sits typically like in direction ahead of us, and then the past is behind.
Gosh. Okay. So I noticed that you said the shadows are in the unconscious, but you were also talking earlier about the intuition being in the unconscious. Is that correct?
It's like picking up on information that isn't we're not necessarily aware of. And so when I talk about like unconscious, um, into for intuition, it's like you're sensing something beyond. And that's really just what neuroscience has talked about. Again, like our shadows are also some of the biggest pieces of information. And because we often really don't want to look at them, when we don't, we're missing out on an entire piece of information. So you can think about the unconscious from a psychological or a Jung did a lot of research on this. So it's like the collective consciousness is sitting, it's like that psychological theory of understanding like who we are as humans. It's like the shadow is like everything we don't want to see. Now the intuition is like sitting in the like when I say unconscious in that way, it's like the lower levels of brain perception that like there's so many things that we're unconsciously doing in our body. Like you're not consciously breathing right now. I mean, maybe now that I said it, you're like, oh yeah, I am breathing. You're not consciously digesting food. You're not consciously like sending these certain neural signals. And so when I say unconscious around intuition, it's like something that's happening without you consciously like, I am going to do this. The unconscious of energy is something that you are literally choosing not to look at. So it's like
Okay.
looking at unconscious within like our psyche versus unconscious within like the actual biological processes in our body.
Okay.
Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah. Thank you for that, like description of the differences there. So, if someone wanted to visit a version of themselves, I guess whether it's past, present, future,
Mhm.
higher, shadow, how would they go about doing that to get the assistance in how to move forward?
So I do it through in like the specific style that I work with clients in. a deeper sense of meditative state. So this isn't just meditating in the state of like I'm sitting, I'm just observing and listening and creating quietness in my mind. It's I'm doing that and then adding in a visualization or a journey, as I like to call them, to be able to go somewhere beyond like the literal and physical. Now, I have a lot of theories from a neuroscience perspective, how that works. Giving being someone that I love science, I'm like, this has not been proven. So I don't want to come out and say, like, this is why this happens.
Yeah.
But when you're able to turn off a little bit of that overthinking, very logical mind, and tap into the deeper senses of the body, tap into a deep sense of safety and groundedness, there is this sense where our inner self is able to open that door to connect with different versions of you. And so we want to connect with the past version of you. I typically do them in meditation where I will sit and ask a past version. I can literally visualize myself going somewhere, or maybe I'll just sit and be like, please come be present with me, speak to me. And then I love to journal because journaling offers this opportunity to externalize what you're perceiving onto like a physical paper and let it out of you and literally just like channel it out of your body. And so I will either sit and journal, like have my inner child say something, and then I will respond to it and I'll ask questions and I'll let them basically quote unquote speak through me, or just noticing like when I'm connected to that energy of my past self, this is what they're saying, letting it go out. So it's not just like sitting in your body. So like meditation's a great way, somatic. So like I can feel the parts of my body that still feel tied to that old version and just like giving it some of that nourishment. I do this also. I mean, if you're a Reiki practitioner, it's a great way to work on that. If you are not, like doing any type of like energy work can be really beautiful. But specifically, if you're sitting here like, I want to connect my inner child, like sitting down, calling them to come forward, or finding a meditation to be able to do that too, or working with a practitioner who specializes in it. I think the one that I shared with you about the future self, when I quit my job in New York City pre-COVID, when I was still working corporate, and I just kind of started this journey for myself, I was losing it because I had just left basically structure. I had left a job. I didn't have a new job. I didn't know what I was doing with my life. Truly, like my mom was like, I don't know how to help you. Like, make a list of 100 things you're grateful for. And when I got to the end of the list, I was like, that's interesting. This is what I'm grateful for now. I wonder what future me on her deathbed will think of her life, like what she'll have been grateful for she experienced.
Oh,
And that was my first experience ever connected with the future version of me, where I literally was like, okay, I imagine that I am that future version looking back, and you really start to just like connect to that energy where you're able to like move into this different level of perception in your mind to connect to it in this, pseudo meditative state. And I remember journaling out this whole thing of like, this is what is important. This is what I was really grateful I did. I'm grateful I took risks and went on an adventure. And then I like came back to my body and was like, okay, cool. So that's what I'm meant to do now. So even though I left corporate and I have no idea what to do in my life, I need to seek adventure. I need to seek experience. I need to find community and connection and love and the ways in which I want to engage with life. So it became this way in which I now had a roadmap forward, even though I was no longer climbing a corporate ladder, or I had basically like left societal structure and what I was supposed to do with my life. So that was another way that I have like would recommend doing it, is like imagining that you are that version of you, or imagining you are that past version of you.
so the word imagination comes up, I immediately think of like, I love my husband. I love him so much. But like when I talk to him about things like this, and I'm like, oh, well, you just know, and it's your imagination, and you do this. He's like, but how do you trust it? How is it real if it's your
Mhm.
imagination? What would you say to those types of questions?
What if? What would it mean in this moment to suspend disbelief? And I will sit here and be the first one to say it. Discernment is the greatest tool in life. Your ability to discern what is good for you, what is right for you, what feels like appropriate. I'm never going to be someone, I actually think blind faith is super unhealthy because you're giving all of your power to someone else and you're just choosing to believe them without deciding if that's actually something that you want to believe. And so for someone who's skeptical, I would say like, okay, you can be skeptical, but like, why not? What if? Would you want to see what it's like? Like, what if you just tried? What if you dipped your toe in? You don't have to like it, but what if you just like thought about it? What if you didn't have to be convinced of something? What if you chose to look at this with like curiosity and just like, I'm exploring something new? And then you just see what you think.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times people have that kind of reaction because either people have tried to convince them their whole life and they're like stubborn. They're like, that's a load of horse shit, pardon my French. That's some woo-woo stuff. Like, I'm not like that. And I'm like,
Exactly.
okay, not, it doesn't have to be your thing, but like, do you have moments where you have like a feeling that isn't explainable? Do you have moments where you want to like sit and just like dream? What if it worked? Like, what's the harm in trying it? And sitting down and being like sitting with like, oh, a future version of me that has this feels this way and feels this way and feels this way. And this is what they said. Like, what if it doesn't work? I mean, I'm going to sit here and tell you, and I do this for a living, and I am 99% sure it's right. But there is 1% of me that's like, this could be all just like an illusion. There's no proof that this is happening,
Right.
but it's helpful. And there's like literal science that has shown right now that it works. And I am living proof that this is like helping me. So if it's not harming me, if it's working in service of me being able to be kind and compassionate and healthy and experience conflict and experience negativity and navigate life in a way that feels good and expansive and freeing to me, if I'm working to build a greater world, like, is there harm being done?
What if something comes in that is harmful?
What do you mean by harmful?
I'm not sure.
In that moment, well, I guess, do you mean like in life? Do you mean like in a session for yourself that feels uncomfortable? Are you talking about like in a reading if something comes in for me?
Well, so like the other day, I'll give you an example. We were having a conversation where I was like, I'm making this decision to move forward in this way in my business because
Mm,
it's based on my intuition. It's just a knowing that I have, and that's what I'm gonna do.
mhm,
And he's like, but where is the line between like, okay, you're listening to this voice you heard or this knowing you have? What if it tells you to go like steal from all these people over here, steal from the rich to feed the poor, and then you have to go to jail? Like, how is that good?
This is a fun can of worms that I'm so glad that you just opened.
We
Okay,
talk about this stuff all the time.
yeah, and I would say I want to start off this conversation by saying there are certain ethics to this work, like foundational human structures that we have to abide by. Do not hurt people. Do not hurt yourself. Do not go out and do things to cause crime. Like, I wanted to start with that of like, do no harm is so important. There's a reason why religion and government exists, to have certain commandments and structures that say, do not hurt other people
Mm-hmm.
intentionally. Now, that being said, life is painful and uncomfortable. And I believe that it is so important to be able to define and discern what goodness means to you and be in a place where you can check your ego. Why do I want this? What is my purpose? What is my reasoning behind this? Where is my power? Why am I choosing this? And does that align with my values? And in that sense, like that's where really alignment comes in of like, does this feel right and good to me? Does this show up in a way that is of service and the greatest good that I want to create for the collective and the freedom? Am I able to sit with my shadows that might want to steal or to buy or to harm because they've been harmed and they're angry and they're pissed and they are like, I'm going to be vindictive? Are you able to hold that energy
Mm-hmm.
and recognize where it's coming from? Because you have aligned yourself with what your actual values and what's important to you is, what your definition of goodness is. And now I am very careful about how to have this conversation because I think sometimes that goodness can get really merged into, well, this is what I believe is good for the world, and that's why I believe it, versus like this humility that comes in and this surrendering of energy that comes in of what does it really mean for everyone to be free? And am I willing to sacrifice the pieces of myself that want power and want connection and want agency and want control and, all of those shadow energies in order to create freedom for everyone? What is the negotiation there? And
Mm-hmm.
so again, as you said, your husband saying, well, if you have this feeling to do something, should you follow it? There's a moment of pause that I always do in readings and I always do with myself of like, why am I having this feeling? Where is this feeling coming from? What is the actual desire of this feeling? And is there a way to meet this need and that desire in a way that is actually good for everyone? On the flip side of that, there is also the way in which we are influenced by others in our life and the like trauma and the underlying nature of like I don't have autonomy and now I need to break free even if it is uncomfortable for someone else. So that's setting a boundary, right? Like if I, for example, I kind of have two different things in my mind. Someone wants to rob a bank, let's say, right? Because I want power and I want greed and I have this urge and I want to do it. Like I feel this knowing.
Mm.
Question is, does that actually align with who you are at your core? Is it actually align with your favorite self, your highest version of self, the person that you want to be, the person you know you have the potential to be? Where is that coming from? Now, again, all those qualifiers in, and I'm not saying go rob a store. If you feel like that is in alignment to you, that is your choice. You have the ability to create the life path and experience that you want to create for yourself. And that is where discernment has to come in of like, what do I want? And who am I? And does that connect into the freedom and the compassion and the culpability of other people's emotions? And how am I taking that into consideration with love and compassion and empathy and a grounded sense of freedom for everyone in that way of like creating abundance, right? And negotiating that.
Mm.
On the flip side, you might be someone who grew up in a really toxic family who's told you that you are the source of all their pain, you are the source of all their trauma, and that by you setting boundaries or you by you leaving to go, let's say, on your own journey of healing is going to cause them all this pain. Are you sacrificing in that moment what you want and intuitively feel like is right because you're worried that your actions are going to cause someone else harm or distress? And so that's where like I think that question becomes so nuanced and I talk about it in this super high level way because everyone's experience where they're at is so unique and different. Where you are in that balance of negotiating what is good for the collective and good for the group and good for you becomes a personal relationship that you need to develop. And that is why, for me, the work that I do with clients of building that relationship with goodness, building that relationship with their favorite self, gaining that autonomy, gaining that empowerment and that freedom becomes this place of how can I check and qualify and discern and know and negotiate what is coming up for me and align it in a way that actually is what I want in life and what I deeply, and when I say want, I mean like my soul wants to express. And so much of what I do at the very foundation for every reading and every healing that I do, I always say, like, I ask that this reading or healing, whatever it is, be in the highest and greatest good of this individual, myself, the community, and the collective as a whole, because it is important that we align what we're pulling on and where that intuitive knowing is coming from in a very certain energy because you can say, I hope this isn't the worst, I'm not saying this is like a joke, but like, hope this isn't the worst interest. Like that's going to be a very different energy that's going to come out then because of the intention. And so when we talk about good or bad, oftentimes I think about those judgments in the moment of like, what do you define as good? What is good to you? What is like your soul? And that becomes something that like is deeply personal to each person that
Right.
like comes for you of like, what do you find to be good? What does good mean? And can you sit with that energy and do that kind of self-reflection that comes from like parts work, that comes from that intuitive work, that comes from the experience, that comes from learning and philosophy and science? Can you sink into that human experience and also that spiritual experience of yourself and decide what good really feels like?
Mm.
And what bad feels like, because those are so deeply personal and so philosophical that like knowing what is good or bad because is truly a philosophical debate at the end of the day.
Right.
And we as humans have been debating it since like since the beginning of time.
Absolutely. And I love how you keep using the word negotiation because we are all connected. And so everything we choose is some kind of negotiation. And I feel like, to your point of being aligned with your values and maybe choosing what your soul really wants means that you have to believe that you're worthy of having what you want. And so there is so much there to unpack and to work on. And that influences your negotiation and what you choose.
Mhm. And I think worth is something that a friend of mine was voice noting me last night and she said it's heartbreaking to think about how many of us struggle with worthiness and the idea of being enough. And I think that is where, for me, that spiritual component that comes in of I am worthy because I exist, regardless of what has happened in my past, or the ways that I have messed up or the things that I have done wrong, I am still worthy of goodness, of love, of acceptance, of a home, of the very foundational needs of being a human, right?
Mhm.
Like these are truly bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like truly just like safety functioning. I am worthy of that.
Mhm.
And when I can think about that idea of worth, like what is it that I'm desiring that I'm not getting? Can I decide just because I want to, even if I have no proof, that I am enough for that in this moment? Because you're always going to be growing and expanding. Like there's always ways to improve. But like in this moment, as a soul being, as a human, I am enough. I am worthy because I decide that I am worthy, because it is the
Yes.
foundation of my being. And it's, you know, then it's like, oh, what part of me doesn't believe that? Where does that come from? Is that a shadow? Is that a past self? How can I sit in that place and give them what they did not give? Hold that level of self-acceptance and love. Hold that sense of presence and decide I'm still worthy of it. And it's a choice. Like
Amazing.
this is where negotiation, choice, discernment, like it is a active participation in your life.
Yeah. Well, good stuff, all good stuff. And I definitely want to give you some time to
Mm.
do a reading. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you feel is important to share?
No, I think that, it's interesting to me because so much of what I do and the reason why I love it is that we spend so much time looking for the answers outside of ourselves, when in reality, everything outside of ourselves is a piece of information that then we get to figure out how that fits with ourselves. And the more that we can sink into our center of self, create that relationship that we are so deeply craving within ourselves, the life outside of us starts to become a reflection then of that. And that's not to say like just the things that have happened to you in your life is because you are not in connection with yourself. Bad things happen because we're human. Bad things happen because life is lifing, and that is the nature of being human in this world. Horror, terror, atrocity, things that should not happen but happen. How we shift the world is by letting ourselves be that truest expression, giving ourselves permission to be that version, and connecting into all the ways in which we can actually expand into that freest version of ourselves. And that to me is like the most important thing, because then you become the deciding agent. You then take the reins of your life and you're like, this is where I want to go. Life stops happening to you and you start engaging back with life. And then it becomes a partnership and a dance, a negotiation,
Mm,
right? Like you can get into, we don't need to go into it of like divine timing. You can get into like all these other pieces, manifestation, like how do you actually start to play with energy, play with the power of your mind, play with the power of your being and your soul to make things happen that you want to. But it all starts with discernment and curiosity and building that relationship with yourself to know that it's possible.
I'm like, woo. All right. So, Ashley, tell us a little bit about like what you're doing here with the cards and how you're going to do this.
So I'm going to set an intention that this reading be for the collective and the highest and greatest good, that it be a place of freedom, of connection, of introspection and joy, and that it find you, who's listening, wherever you are, and offer you the insight you might be seeking. I like to think of readings as metaphors. So I might say something as you're hearing that, noticing how you're responding to the message, noticing what brings up for you, and recognizing too that so much of spirituality is metaphor. It's kind of like art, or like the art, that poetic poem you had to read in eighth grade, where it's like, what does the blue mean to you? What does it feel like? Like, what is it? What is the interpret? Like, that is what this work is. So the way in which you can see this as a work of art and noticing what you are seeing or is being reflected to you in the reading or reflected to you in the cards or the messages, to give you that space of self-reflection and space of insight, and knowing that whatever you're interpreting from this is what you're meant to interpret from this. I always say, like, take what you need and leave the rest, but just listen and notice kind of what comes up for you. Okay. I like to ask questions. So, the way that I like to work with cards is by setting an intention or asking a question of like, how is something showing up in a life? Where is it coming? Where is there lack of alignment? I just ask the question like, where is the energy stuck right now? And then I'll ask, like, okay, given what's coming up, where do we go from here? Okay, so I pulled the first card. I asked for like, where is goodness flowing in? And then I asked, like, where is the energy stuck? And how do we move forward from that? And what's really interesting, so tarot, specifically why I love it so much, is split up into 5 different sections. Um, 2 major sections, one that's called the Major Arcana, which follows big spiritual life themes in our life. It's very like hero's journey, archetypal, like something that we're being asked to engage with on like a spiritual level. And then the Minor Arcana, which is split into 4 different suits, and each suit has a different element. So the wands represent fire, which is like passion, vitality, life force, like how we drive in the world, where we create energy, where we find purpose and like inspiration. Cups, which is water, which is the emotional aspect of life, relationships, connection, motion, love, feeling, all of that good stuff. Air, which is swords, or swords, which is air, which is our mindset, our perception, and how we communicate. And pentacles, which is earth, which is about like the actual foundations of like growing and building and creating life, things in life. So everything that feels material of like I'm building something. It's very like it's like abundance and creation and nourishment and like embodied, like very much the body. So the first card that I pulled, that being said, is the Four of Wands. And the Four of Wands speaks to celebration. And so when I ask like where is goodness showing up in life right now, there is this feeling of really acknowledging where things are working out for you and where there is so much joy for what you are existing within in this moment. There is a call to really acknowledge like where you are right now and where maybe past versions of you or future versions you're like, God, like she's doing it. Like she's really, really doing it. Like sitting in that energy of you are currently succeeding even if it doesn't feel like it in this moment, there is this sense that like goodness is flowing in when you choose to feel and be inspired and acknowledge the way in which you are a success story. And noticing in that moment where you might not believe that. And what does it mean to actively celebrate yourself in that? What actions can you take? How can you literally fill up your cup as a person by choosing to celebrate and to tap into the idea that I am worthy of celebration? Is that word worth again? I'm worthy of celebration because I'm existing, because I am alive in this moment. What does it mean for me to give myself a sense of goodness and really choose to celebrate that? And I think that there's a world in which there are people who are listening to this are currently like have a milestone that they're hitting and they're like, I'm gonna go out and like do something as an act of service to myself. It can be, I want to actually sit down and like acknowledge for myself something I'm really going. But any way that feels like this is a way for you to celebrate yourself, not only are these celebrations a flood of goodness, like these acknowledgments of what's happening, but it's also a reinforcement of the idea of like I am worthy, things are good, I am on the right trajectory, like we're doing it. We need that like kind of filling the cup in that way, or like really acknowledging that within our body. It's almost like we need that energy boost in order to keep going where we want to be going, and it's really important to celebrate. Part of where things don't feel totally in alignment is the need to have it right. I pulled the King of Wands and the Knight of Wands reversed. So the King and the Knight are, the King is what I would like to call undeveloped or younger masculine energy. And when I say masculine energy, I mean material, structured, action oriented, very much the way we assert and create structures in the world and the way in which we give and do. Feminine is going to be more receptive, fluid, immaterial, like perceptive. We all have equal parts feminine and masculine in our body energy. Sometimes I like to use the words yin and yang because feminine and masculine can bring up all these like archetypes and these gendered norms. But when I talk about masculine, I mean literally in like the action, structured, assertion, energies in which way we show up. So and the king is the developed. And so it feels like there is this need to be right. There is this need to force, and there is this need to prove that is coming through and to be recognized and seen as an authority, or like it perceived as being right, or perceived as being powerful, or perceived as being recognized that way. And part of what doesn't feel totally like what you're wanting with that celebration is needing that proof and needing to make it happen versus like acknowledging whatever moment I'm at right now. Like I'm very much in the point of celebration and a point of being able to be connected to my being and realizing too that you are a leader in your life because you are living your life. Because no one has lived your life before, you are automatically the narrator and the main character and the one who's designing the story. Oftentimes, the feeling of like needing it to come from someone else comes from this need to prove again or to be recognized. And in that recognition, feel worthy with the Four of Wands to celebrate and to be good. And I think that's where I'm going to pull another card. Part of what I think is this healing point for you and like a healing point that's coming up is getting really, really curious about like, where do I want to be and what is keeping me stuck from being in that place? And where am I feeling like I can't, like I am exhausted actually in the way in which I feel like I need to prove and force right now. In reality, I'm just really, really tired. The 10 of Wands reverse, I'm burnt out. I'm exhausted. I actually don't want to be doing this anymore. Am I putting on a facade or am I trying to live out something that is not actually working for me because the way it's perceived or the way in which like I want to be recognized or I want to be right or want to be in power or I need power to feel good about myself. And I think part of what's coming in as this healing point is not only introducing a new perspective for yourself and a sense of compassion and insight. I pulled the Ace of Wands, which is like the very beginning of the wand journey. So it's like a new aha moment. It's a point of clarity. But I also pulled the Wheel of Fortune. The Wheel of Fortune is one of those major arcana cards, and it speaks to good things happening in a completely unexpected way. It is like one of those like luck, truly. It's like you spin the wheel of fortune, you have no idea where it's going to stand, but there is this overarching feeling of like, can I choose to embrace like something good is happening, even if I have no idea how it's going to happen or how it's going to flow into my life. I choose to believe in prosperity and there being some type of goodness that is coming to me, even if I have no idea like what that's going to look like. I want to, it's surprise. It is being shown something that again goes beyond the literal or the material. It is literally working with the idea of like fortune favors those who celebrate. Fortune favors those who are bold in the way that they choose to believe in themselves. They choose to recognize that like they are worthy and deserving of good things because they exist. Fortune comes regardless of that, but oftentimes we can recognize fortune more readily when we are able to sink into that place of I choose to believe that something good is coming. And can I introduce that new perspective in? And I think it's really interesting in the way that merges with the idea of feeling like I have to keep forcing something that's not working and I'm exhausted by it. And I also like am not able to actually like recognize to myself that I'm burnt out because I'm like, if I just try harder, if I just do more, if I just keep going and going and going, it's going to work out. And realizing like part of that's coming from this desire to like control and do and force because I'm wanting to be in that power versus how can I flip it into a more balanced state of like really sinking into that place of I I choose to believe because I choose to believe. And I choose to suspend disbelief for a moment. And I choose to, in that moment of suspension, which often happens when we're enjoying ourselves, notice what type of clarity or type of insight comes in. And then how can I choose to build that? And how can I choose to play into that? And what ways can I choose to grow that energy in my life? And when I say that, I mean do literal things that follow that up, whether that's journaling, whether that's habit tracking, whether that is shifting mindset and belief patterns, whether that is, going out and working with a coach or finding a therapist, or maybe it's choosing to move. Like there are literal ways we can bring that to life of like, what ways do I want to celebrate? And how can I not just decide like, yeah, woo, I'm going to celebrate because I'm feeling it. Like I'm actually going to act upon it.
Mm.
And I'm going to notice the different ways that I meant to act upon it and choose to do things in a very expansive way. And I say that because I just pulled the Three of Coins, which represents very much when we have three different like energies, and the way when you bring those energies together, they create more abundance. It's like the perfect team, like someone who's they're really good at their skill set. They bring in another person who's really good at their skill set. You bring in another person who's really good at their skill set. And now you have like the perfect expansion because you're using different parts of you. So the way in which like you're really creating that opening for that goodness and that opening for that fortune, that opening for that insight, and using that insight to notice like where can I start to do things differently and how can I introduce new energy and literally bring that to life. I'm looking at your face and you're like, ta-da! So sit with that. And I know that that can feel a little high level. It's not necessarily like the TikTok reading of like your ex is going to drop into your DMs. Like someone is thinking about you. Can you feel it? Like that is not how I choose to read it all. And like, because this is a collective reading, it's going to be super overarching like that.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, see what you want from this. Like, notice what that brings up for you and where you're being called into insight and reflection. I think journaling is a great way to like kind of write down and reflect. And if you're wanting more specific insight, that's where I would recommend booking an individual reading or going and finding a reader who you feel like you trust or feel called to and is working ethically and is very much here to support you in your desires. I always say, I'm not here to tell you your future. I'm here to help you create it before readings
Yeah.
because I'm not like, this is what's going to happen. Now I sometimes get imprints, but like at the end of the day, it's like, how does it feel to you? So take from that again what you need and resonates, leave what doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's coming up for you, Brandy? I'm curious.
For me. Ooh. Well, one, I want to thank you for doing that reading. And it's funny because the whole first half of the reading, I thought, oh, this actually feels very pertinent to a lot of
Mm,
my clients. Like, I hope they listen. I hope they listen to this reading. Because I feel like it'd be really helpful. And it wasn't until the end when you were talking about the threes that it really started to resonate with my own personal
mm,
where I'm at right now. Because talking about symbolism, I've got three different projects going on at the moment. And I'm trying to figure out how they're all going to converge or fit together or work together. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't know at this minute how they're going to fit together, but I'm going to keep putting them out into the world and I'm just going to see how it evolves and I'm going to go
mm.
with the flow. And so far, doors are opening in all three avenues. And I know they're all related, but we'll just see how it unfolds and have that trust. And I was walking around a track the other day at my son's soccer practice, and it was so interesting because three shadows appeared of me, like in my peripheral vision. I looked over and I was like, oh, that's fun. And
Mm,
as I kept walking, they would get closer together or further apart. And then another one showed up. So there was four. And I was like, ooh, what part of me is that? And I was just sort of like looking at the symbolism, like, how are these going to converge? And
mm,
I took it to mean it's okay that they don't right now,
mhm.
but they're all still valid. They're all still there. And eventually it'll it'll come together because they're all pieces of you. And so
And I,
that was so fun. Like I was like, whoa, blown away.
no, 100. I was like, can I share an insight that I'm coming through based on the reading we did?
Sure.
How comfortable are you with multidimensionality? And when I mean that, I think that as I'm looking at these cards, I think it's very interesting just in the way I see it kind of mirroring for what you just shared of like, do I need to just own one part of myself? Do I need to be only seen as one part of myself? Do I need to like be convincing as one part of myself in the way that's being perceived? Or do I give myself the permission to be imperfect and not know where this is going or what this is building or what I'm growing from this and lean into the idea that like when I give myself permission to be multifaceted and like super interdimensional as a person that like there's actually creates more abundance in my life because I am able to put eggs in different baskets. And when we are able to spread out and not need to necessarily be like, I think about when you look at like leaders in our government, like our leaders in the world, or like celebrities or people that we see as these like beings that they often have like a lot of issue in the fact that like this is like my identity is now who I am and I don't know who I am beyond that. That
Mm-hmm.
when we give ourselves permission to lean into so many different aspects, you're actually creating more space for possibility and more
Mm.
abundance to flow into your life and whatever way that looks like.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think that that's being comfortable with giving myself permission to be multifaceted
Mm,
or multidimensional, however you phrased it, is something that I think is new for me.
mm,
Like I've been working on it, I've been allowing it to happen and trying to embrace it and to not be afraid for any person I come across to see all aspects of me. I don't want to hide any part of me anymore. But because I've compartmentalized in the past because of my trauma responses and things like that, I haven't always allowed that to be, and I just want to.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I tell you, it's interesting that you're talking about this because it's something I'm also personally going through in my own life of um having really I don't know the right dove divin I was really so like in my work for so long that
Mhm.
I realized that I felt like there's only one version of myself I could be, and that was really hard for me because I felt like I was over living into one version or one archetype of like the healer and the intuitive. And I don't like to be put in a box. And at the same time, like the boxes often make me feel safe because I am
Yeah.
controlling the way someone is perceiving me.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of similarity in what you're sharing right now, just from the sense of like I am noticing what it feels like to be able to be goofy and silly and like enjoy playing Sims and loving to read my smut books and my hockey romances and it's like my fairy novels and like being witnessed in that and witnessed as a person versus as a coach or a healer or a sister or a whatever, definitions or labels or identity labels that come into my life and noticing when I start to just exist beyond them
Hmm.
a little bit, how I actually start to feel and how I actually feel more trusting of life because I'm not hyper focused or trying to control one aspect of it. And when I give myself permission to externalize it and like lean into all these different parts of me, I'm actually becoming more me. So I love that that's similar to like in a mirrored way is kind of what's coming up for you too of like I'm actually able to like when I accept something comes in I'm like yeah whoa like that was unexpected versus being like well I was expecting that like that was on my list right like it creates more room for possibility because I'm not just always only focused on one thing.
Yeah. It, and there's a fear around not focusing on one thing because it's like, oh, how am I going to logistically manage all of these different parts and pieces? And and I keep thinking, oh, just keep it simple, keep it simple. But I don't know. How do I keep it simple and manage all of these parts? It's a thing that I've been thinking about for sure.
Yeah. Does this sense and the fear of like failure come up for you? Because I know for me, when I don't do something, it's because I'm afraid it's going to not work out and it's going to be bad. And then I'm going to be perceived in that way of like, this is now becoming a thing where like I really want to do. I have a couple creative projects I'm working on, but I'm like, I have to actually, if I'm going to do it, I want to be really invested and I want to like show up in a certain way
Yeah.
versus just doing it for the sake of doing it and letting it be messy and letting there be a journey and not having it all perfect before it goes to launch or goes to like being seen, like actually just beginning. And I think for me, like creating that space to be like, it's good. Like you can just do, dude. Like it's not so serious. It's not a big deal. Like
Yeah.
you can just like notice, like maybe it is complex and messy, but like, is that human?
Yeah. Even
You
if people are witnessing it, like it's okay for people to witness it and it be messy. I've definitely been going through working through that. I feel like I've really grappled with fear of failure in the last so I've been going through a spiritual journey. Like my first spiritual awakening happened in 2017. So
know?
I've just really been diving deep into it uh, on and off, but lately, like in the last couple of years, really hardcore. And yeah, I feel like I've hit like several levels and sort
Mm,
of like passed the test. And now I'm just sort of like trying to integrate it all and make it happen in real life.
mm,
And so yeah, so like I launched a website today actually for an art project, but it's not perfect. And I
mhm.
was like, "Oh, I wanted all these things to be this way, but no, it's minimum viable product and it's okay and it's going to evolve. It's going to look different in a year than it does from now and we'll see. We'll see how it goes."
And like I think it's a shame. I want to sit down and be like, okay, 4 of Wands, celebrate yourself. Like it's huge. Like you
Well, there
did
we
it. And
go.
like, what if it's just I can just celebrate this thing that I did and like be excited for myself that I did something differently for the first time. And like I didn't have to be perfect and it didn't have to be established and didn't have to be like, that way. And does that give you then permission to be like, well, I have no idea where this is gonna go? Like, and I'm gonna ride with it and just like let it evolve. And I think there is this at least I know for me, I think a lot of times the fear of failure comes from like it is a fear of being bad, or it is a fear that like in doing the wrong thing, I have gone the wrong way and I'm then like not connected to myself or then like have done something wrong. And then it's like that fear of punishment that comes in of like, if I do something wrong, I'm going to be punished for doing something wrong. So I know where that comes from and we don't have to go into that. But I also think a lot of times that desire to then have perfection is a desire to control outcome to protect the self from experiencing negativity or discomfort. And
Right.
that's where I'm like, okay, so like I can't control any of this. So how do I sit within myself and be like, let's just see what happens and let's take it at a pace that feels good to me and not put pressure on myself or not like be like, you're bad, like you did a thing and you had a typo in your email or like you didn't speak that right way or you just mumbled or stuttered your words. Like, where can I actually, again, for myself, looking at these cards, invite in a new perspective
Hmm.
and trust in like the divine unfolding and the goodness that's always prevalent and that I am super multi-talented and very skilled at what I do and there's a lot of different versions of me that are really good at building things and that I don't have to be perfect and right and be seen that way and that's okay. So you see like that's isn't this fun now that we're like taking that reading and then applying it into both of our lives?
It really is. And now I'm like, oh, maybe it applied way more than I thought it did, honestly. I'm glad we talked through it.
Yeah. And I think so for people who are listening, like that's kind of the process typically I'll do within a reading and a little more formally of like, I'm saying all this stuff, like, what are you relating? What is that bringing up for you? Like, what is that sparking for you? Like, what does this make you think of? And I like to say too, like, I don't get like PDF handouts of like, this person was born on this day and they are in a relationship. Like sometimes I can pick up on energies, but I don't have like a literal definition. And so I really love when readings feel very conversational because it feels more of a relationship that you're building. And like, we're going deeper into the insight of like, what is this bringing up for you? Where do you feel resistant to it? Where do you feel like a desire to control? And like, where do you not want to be seen in the imperfection? And like, can you then, like, what does it mean? Like, are you forcing something that you don't actually want to do? Or are you like putting so much pressure on it that you're just actually exhausted and you want to give it a beat? And it's gonna like unfold. Like, there's no rush. I want to leave too with this. I like to create like as a way to harness energy, mood boards on Canva. So like digital ones, and I'll
Mhm.
use them as my phone background screens. And I created that one back in October, and I like to leave them for as long as I feel like they're needed in my life as like the energy. And there's a quote in the middle of it. I have no idea who said it, but it says, "Why so much fight against what is? You are more powerful in your surrender than you could ever be in your resistance." Still meditating on that one 6 months later.
So, Ashley, if our listeners want to find you in your work, where do they go?
Well, very conveniently, my website is ashleybjones.com. My Instagram handle is ashley.b.jones. Or you can email me at ashley@ashleybjones.com. Any of those ways really work. I offer one-on-one readings that I call the transformation, which is one part reading, one part energy healing to help you like somatically integrate all the information and goodness we just went through in the reading. I offer one-on-one coaching containers that I call the cocoon to be your place of personal metamorphosis and transformation to meet all these different versions of self, to figure out where you're stuck and to figure out how you want to get there and use all the different tools that I have to do that. They're very personalized. I have a group program that I call Metamorphosis that is a 12-week experience where you get to meet all 5 different versions of yourself along with your spirit guides to be this resourcing between heaven and earth so you can really transform your life. So yeah, that's kind of where I work with people one-on-one and I sometimes do events or workshops and I do weekly readings on my Instagram story if you just want to pop in and like get something that's more prevalent, more present and just have a point of connection. And if you have questions about any of this or you're like, DM me. Like, we'll voice note back and forth. Like I love chatting and connecting.
Awesome. And guys, Ashley's Instagram feed is beautiful, by the way. Like, I love it. And yeah, your newsletters are great. And thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a really great conversation.
Thank you for having me. Truly, it's brings me so much joy.
Thanks for tuning in. Check out more of our episodes here and at humanamplified.com. Remember to subscribe.